"Sign it," my brother said, sliding the paper across the table like it was nothing. Like he hadn't just handed me a document that would erase everything our father had ever worked for. "It's already done, Claire. Just make it official." I looked down at the paper, then at my father's signature forged, clean, practiced. And I understood, right then, that the man sitting across from me was not the brother I grew up with. He was something else entirely. My name is Claire Merritt. I'm 29 years old. And that Tuesday afternoon in my parents' living room, 3 weeks after we buried my father, I became someone I didn't recognize either. My father passed in October. Pancreatic cancer, fast and cruel, the way that disease always is. He was 61. He coached Little League for 14 years. He made the same terrible pun every Sunday at breakfast. He loved my mother so completely and so quietly that most people never even noticed it. And when he died, he left behind a house, a small investment account, and 2 children who had apparently never known each other at all. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up, I looked up to him. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, who sat with me through every thunderstorm when I was small. But somewhere between then and now, something shifted in him. I just never wanted to see it. He married young. His wife, my sister-in-law, is the kind of woman who keeps a running tally of every favor she's ever done you. She tracks debts the way accountants track numbers. Precise, patient, and always collecting. The two of them together created something neither was alone, a shared hunger that disguised itself as ambition. After my father's diagnosis, my brother started coming around more, helping with appointments, driving my father to treatment. My mother and I were grateful. We didn't ask questions we should have asked. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that he'd used those drives, those quiet moments in waiting rooms and hallways, to have conversations with my father that my father was too sick and too medicated to fully understand. He'd suggested changes. Small ones at first. "Dad, wouldn't it be easier if the house just went directly to me? Avoids probate. Saves time." My father, exhausted and trusting his oldest child, had nodded. My brother had a notary ready. So when I sat in that living room 3 weeks after the funeral, the paper in front of me wasn't a request. It was the result of 6 months of careful, deliberate maneuvering. The new will left the house entirely to my brother. The investment account split, but with conditions that effectively froze my access for 5 years. My mother's share restructured so that she'd need my brother's signature to access anything above a monthly allowance. He'd built a cage and dressed it up as estate planning. "This isn't what Dad wanted," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. My brother shrugged. "Dad signed it. That's what he wanted." My mother sat at the corner of the couch, hands folded, looking at the floor. She'd already signed her portion. He'd gotten to her first, alone, in the fog of grief, the morning after the funeral. She'd trusted him. She always trusted him more. "Mom," I said softly. She looked up at me with eyes that were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Claire, please don't make this harder. He said it's what your father wanted to keep things simple." Simple. That word sat in my chest, like something cold. I looked at my brother. He was watching me with that particular expression, patient, slightly bored, certain he'd already won. His wife stood in the kitchen doorway, pretending to look at her phone. She wasn't looking at her phone. "I need time to read this," I said. "It's straightforward," he said. "I'm sure it is." I picked up the document and folded it carefully. "I'll call you." He didn't like that. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not quite anger, not quite worry. Control disturbed. "Don't overthink it, Claire. This is what families do." I nodded, smiled the smallest possible smile, and walked to my car. I sat in the driveway for a long time. The house looked the same as it always had. The shutters my father painted 2 summers ago were still that particular shade of actions of gray-green he debated over for weeks. The flower bed my mother kept obsessively neat. All of it sitting there, ordinary and beloved, and I had just been handed a piece of paper designed to turn it into leverage. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I started the car and drove home, and by the time I got there, I wasn't grieving anymore. I was thinking. The first thing I did was call my father's attorney. Not the one my brother had used for the new document, the original one. The attorney my father had worked with for 11 years, a quiet woman named Patricia who had offices downtown and who answered her own phone. She was sorry about my father. She remembered him well. And when I described the new document, the dates, the conditions, there was a pause on her line that told me everything before she said a word. "Claire," she said carefully. "When exactly was this signed?" I told her the date on the document. Another pause. "Your father was hospitalized on the 14th. The signature is dated the 15th. I closed my eyes. "He was unconscious on the 15th. "I know," she said. "I visited him that afternoon." There it was. Not suspicion. Not intuition. A fact, clean and verifiable, sitting right at the center of everything my brother had built. We met in her office 2 days later. I brought the document my brother had given me. I'd photographed every page the night he gave it to me, before I handed the original back, claiming I needed to review it. Patricia spread the copies across her desk and put on her reading glasses and didn't say anything for a long time. "This is a forgery," she said, finally. Not a question. "Yes." "The notary stamp," she said, tapping one page. "I know this notary. She works out of an office on Clement Street. She's affiliated with your sister-in-law's real estate firm." I hadn't known that. I wrote it down. Patricia looked at me over her glasses. "If your father was incapacitated when this was signed, this document is legally void. But to prove that, we need medical records from the hospital, a witness statement from anyone who saw him that day, and a handwriting analysis of the signature itself." "I can get the records," I said. "I'll request the analysis," she said. "Claire, you understand this is a serious allegation. If we pursue this, it becomes a legal matter. Your brother could face criminal charges." I looked at her steadily. "He already made it a legal matter. He just didn't expect me to show up." She nodded slowly. "Give me 2 weeks." I spent those 2 weeks being the same person I always was. I called my brother on his birthday. I brought my mother soup. I smiled at my sister-in-law's Instagram posts about the house she'd already started pinning renovation ideas, reposting cottagecore kitchens with little heart emojis. I watched and said nothing. But I was not quiet inside. I was building. I went through every text message my brother had ever sent me. I found 3 where he'd referenced handling Dad's estate in ways that, in context, read differently now. I found a voicemail from 4 months ago where he said casually that he was taking care of the will situation. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. I saved everything. I called the hospital and requested my father's medical records from the week of the 15th. The attending physician, a soft-spoken man who had been extraordinarily kind during those last weeks, confirmed in writing that my father had been non-responsive on that date. He had been transitioned to comfort care. He had not been able to hold a pen, let alone sign a legal document. My hands were shaking when I read that confirmation. Not from fear, from something closer to grief arriving late, because the implications of what my brother had done in those last days, in those final, sacred, terrible days, had finally finished settling. He had forged our dying father's signature. While our father was dying, I drove to my mother's house on a Thursday evening, unannounced. She was in the kitchen, and she looked startled and then tired when she saw my face. "I need you to sit down." "Mom," I said. She sat. I laid out everything slowly. The date of the signature, the hospital record, Patricia's assessment, the notary connected to my sister-in-law's firm, the text messages. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. My mother sat very still through all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for so long that I started to worry. Then she said, "I knew something felt wrong." She said she'd asked him, once, when he first brought the documents to her. Something about the timing didn't feel right. He had looked at her the way he looked at people who were inconveniencing him and said, "Mom, I handled it. You're exhausted. Let me take care of this." And she, who was exhausted, who had just watched her husband of 34 years stop breathing, had let him. "He used your grief against you," I said gently. She pressed her hands flat on the table. "What do? We let Patricia do her job," I said. "And we don't tell him anything yet." My mother looked at me for a moment like she was seeing someone new sitting across from her. Then she nodded. 2 weeks later, Patricia called. The handwriting analyst had completed his review. The signature on the new will did not match my father's known signatures from documents executed in the preceding 3 years. There were specific inconsistencies in the pressure and letter formation that indicated a different hand entirely. Combined with the medical records establishing incapacity, Patricia was filing to have the document declared void. She had also, with my permission, referred the matter to the district attorney's office. I was standing in my kitchen when she told me that last part. I looked out the window at the street below. Ordinary Thursday afternoon, people walking dogs, a kid on a scooter, everything completely normal. "Thank you, Patricia," I said. "Your father would have hated this," she said, and I understood she meant the situation, not the action. But he also would have understood. I believed that. The investigation was quiet at first. I kept my mouth shut. I did not tell my best friend. I did not post anything, hint at anything, or let a single emotion show in any interaction with my brother. He sent me a text asking when I was going to sign my portion of the documents. I said I was still reviewing them. He said I was being difficult. I said I just wanted to make sure I understood everything. He sent a long message about how complicated estate law was and how he was just trying to make things easier for everyone. I read it. I screenshotted it. I said nothing. My sister-in-law was less patient. She called me on a Saturday morning with that particular tone she saved for situations where she believed she held all the power, smooth, almost sympathetic, generously condescending. "Claire, I know this is hard," she said. "Grief makes people suspicious. It makes people look for problems that aren't there. Your brother has done nothing but sacrifice his time and energy for this family, and now you're treating him like what?" I asked. A pause. "Like an enemy." "I'm not treating anyone like anything," I said pleasantly. "I just want to understand the documents." She made a small sound, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh. "You always did make everything so complicated." "I probably learned it from someone," I said. She hung up. That was the last conversation we had before everything changed. 3 weeks later, at 11 in the morning, 2 investigators from the district attorney's office arrived at my brother's home. I wasn't there. I found out from my mother, who had gotten a call from my brother 20 minutes after it happened, his voice unraveling in a way she said she hadn't heard since he was a child. He called me 20 minutes after that. I let it go to voicemail, then I listened to it. He said the words misunderstanding 4 times. He said family twice. He said my name in a tone I recognized, the same tone he used when I was 12 and had accidentally broken something of his, and he needed to decide whether I was sorry enough. Appraising. Testing. He didn't apologize for a single thing. I set my phone down on the counter and went back to making lunch. By evening, word had spread the way it always does in families, through cousins, through my mother's sister, through a neighbor who had apparently seen the investigator's car. My phone lit up with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all of them some version of what is happening and is this true. I responded to none of them. My aunt called. She was my father's sister, sharp and funny and not easily fooled, and she had never liked my sister-in-law. "Tell me everything," she said when I picked up. So, I did. Clearly, factually, without editorializing. I told her about the dates, the medical records, the handwriting analysis, the notary. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something my father used to say. "Well, now we know." My brother retained an attorney. He sent a message through that attorney to Patricia, suggesting a family settlement that would avoid litigation, one that was, in practical terms, an offer for me to take a reduced version of what the forged will offered and go away. Patricia read it to me over the phone. "No," I said. "I'll let them know." "Patricia," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think he thought I wouldn't figure it out? Or do you think he just didn't care?" She considered this. "In my experience," she said, "people who do what your brother did rarely distinguish between those 2 things. They assume the outcome either way." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. There was a court date set, but it never went to trial. 3 days before the hearing, the handwriting analyst submitted his affidavit, and the medical records were entered into the record, and my brother's attorney apparently had a very direct conversation with him about the likelihood of prevailing. That evening, my brother called Patricia directly. He wanted to make a deal. The terms, The original will, my father's actual, legal, properly executed will from 2 years prior, which left the house to both of us jointly and divided the investment account equally, would be reinstated. My sister-in-law's notary would surrender her license as part of a separate agreement with the state. My brother would plead no contest to a reduced charge of document fraud and receive probation, no jail time, in exchange for full cooperation and restitution. The district attorney accepted. My mother called me the night the agreement was finalized. She sounded like herself again for the first time since October. Not happy, it wasn't a happy situation, but present. Clear. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not asking harder questions. You were grieving," I told her. "He planned it that way. That doesn't let me off the hook." "No," I said, "but it's context." She was quiet for a moment. "Your father would have been furious." "Yeah," I said, "he would have. And then he would have made a terrible pun about it." I laughed. The kind that catches you by surprise. That comes out before you decide to let it. My mother laughed too, soft and unsteady. And for a moment the house didn't feel so empty. I drove over and next morning. We sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee and didn't talk about my brother or the will or any of it. We talked about my father. About the time he convinced himself he could fix the dishwasher and flooded the kitchen. About the way he read the newspaper, out loud to himself, editorializing every paragraph. About small, specific things that no legal document could have given either of us or taken away. My father's house is still standing. The shutters are still that particular gray-green. My mother's garden is still precise and cared for. In the spring, we're going to repaint the front porch together. She found the exact color my father had picked out and never gotten around to using. My brother and his wife moved to another state. There was nothing dramatic about it, no confrontation, no final conversation. He texted me once, a few months later, something brief and stilted about hoping things could eventually be different between us. I read it carefully. I thought about what I wanted to say and what I didn't, and then I put my phone away. I don't hate him. That surprised me too, the same way the absence of tears had. I think he is a person who made choices that revealed something that was always there, and now we both have to live with knowing what that something is. What I carry now is not anger. It's something more like clarity, the kind that only comes after something has been stripped all the way down. I know what my father's house is worth, not in dollars, in the way my mother hums while she's gardening, in the way the light hits the kitchen window at 4 in the afternoon, in the way I still reach for the phone sometimes to tell him something before I remember. No forged signature could have transferred any of that. The day Patricia's office confirmed the original will was reinstated, I drove to the cemetery. I sat with my father for a while. I told him what had happened, all of it, including the parts that were hard to say. The way grief had been used, the ways each of us had been maneuvered, and the way it had ended. The day was cold and bright. The sky that particular October blue that seems too beautiful for difficult things. I sat there until I'd said everything I needed to say. Then I drove home, and I made dinner, and I called my mother to ask what she wanted to do for Thanksgiving. And she said she'd been thinking about trying a new recipe for the first time in 30 years. Dad would have complained about it, I said. Endlessly, she agreed. For the whole meal, and then eaten 3 helpings. I smiled. Set the timer on the stove. Watched the streetlights come on outside. Some losses don't end. They just change shape. They settle into the fabric of ordinary days in a recipe you've never tried, in a porch you're finally going to paint, in the particular quality of a winter afternoon when the house feels full of something you can't name but won't let yourself forget. My brother thought he was taking something from me. He thought, the way small people think when they have calculated everything except the one variable they never account for, that what could be documented could be owned, and what could be owned could be controlled. And that I would be too tired or too sad or too much the younger sibling to see what he'd done. He was wrong about all of it. What my father left me isn't listed on any document. It's the understanding that the people who love you do it quietly and completely, that it doesn't announce itself in signatures or square footage, that the measure of what someone gave you can't be converted into anything a notary can stamp. I know that now in a way I didn't before, and I think, if I'm honest, That's the thing my brother could never take and never understood how to keep. The difference between us finally laid plain. He had a house. I had everything else.